Recruitment has never been more important in football. Gone are the days of 11 local players, all born within a 15-mile radius of the stadium, spending 20 years together at the same club. The average Premier League starting 11 now features fewer than 3 of the club's own academy graduates, and 2/3 of the league's players aren't even English. Now every club is scouring the entire globe in search of the next Lionel Messi, Cristiano Ronaldo, and Britt Assombalonga. So transfers, both incoming and outgoing, are king. There are a lot of teams who do inspired transfer business in one window, like Liverpool in the summer of 2018, when they brought in the likes of Fabinho and Alisson, but followed up with a rubbish one, like Liverpool the following season, when they signed Sepp Vandenberg, Andy Lonergan, and Adrian. In today's video though, inspired by Chelsea's recent bargain hunting, I want to take a look at some of the clubs who have consistently got it right. Yeah, alright, not them, with a plethora of hits and very few misses over the last 5 to 10 years. Narrowing it down to just 7 clubs was a nigh on impossible task, so you could expect some very honourable mentions sandwiched between first and second place. You lucky devils. No, not the Red Devils, just to be clear, they're definitely not in there. Sorry United fans, but you would have to admit it's been a rough ride in recent years. Without further ado then, here are 7 of the best clubs at doing transfers or something. 7th, Braga. Most of you probably don't spend a lot of time watching or even thinking about Portuguese football, aside from the 0.9% of my viewers who are actually Portuguese. Hola, amigo jeitosa. And when the rest of you do, it's probably centred around the big 3 of Sporting, Porto and Benfica, all of whom, it should be said, have done some outstanding transfer business in recent years. There is a less suspecting Portuguese club though, namely Sporting Clube de Braga, who I think are even more worthy of an inclusion. Braga, based in the beautiful and historic city of the same name, about an hour north of Porto, have never won the Liga Portugal and are probably best known for their stunning stadium, opened in 2003, which is carved into the side of a mountain. They perhaps ought to be just as renowned for their transfer business though, since for the past decade, Braga's recruitment has been almost faultless. Through the likes of Rafa, Pizzi, Paulinho, Pedro Neto, David Carmo, Francisco Trincao and Vitinha, Braga have turned over €200 million profit in terms of their net spend over the past decade and more than €100 million in the last 3 seasons alone. That is more than Benfica over the same period, in a league which generates more profit on transfers than any other in world football. Age ambivalent when it comes to recruitment, in the current window, Braga have signed the likes of Victor Gomez and Siku Nakate, who are aged 23 and 24, as well as a 39-year-old Jose Font on a free transfer from Lille. Braga's current captain, Ricardo Horta, is arguably their best signing of all though. Signed on a free transfer from Malaga in 2017, Horta has made 172 goal contributions in 326 games for the club, as one of the Premier League's outstanding players for the past 7 or 8 years, and Braga have done remarkably well to keep hold of him for all of that time. The reward for Braga's sensational business, aside from the more than €200 million of profit, has been 9 successive top 5 finishes, including 2 top 3 finishes, breaking the Big 3 stronghold in just the last 4 years. It is a remarkable testament to how well Braga have been managed that they have missed out on European football just once in the last 18 seasons. In October 2022, just under a year ago, 21.67% of Braga's shares were acquired for €80 million by Qatar Sports Investments, a subsidiary of Qatar's sovereign wealth fund, which also owns PSG. Of course, PSG's transfer strategy in recent years has been markedly different to Braga's, but Braga don't appear to have changed tact since their royal overlords arrived. 6th, AS Monaco. AS Monaco is a bizarre football club who have been competitive for so long now that it's never really acknowledged just how unusual they are. Monaco is a sovereign city-state and probably the world's best-known tax haven, but instead of having a national football team, which they could do if they wanted, Monaco has a slightly larger population than San Marino. The microstate's royals decided to focus on having a club team represent them instead, allowing them to draw upon players from outside of Monaco. Since Monaco also doesn't have a football league, AS Monaco compete in the French league system, where they are among the most successful clubs with 8 Ligue 1 titles and 5 Coupe de France titles, despite not actually being based in France at all. For all of their success, because Monaco is tiny and full of people who would much rather spend time on Jeffrey Epstein's island than watching football, they have the lowest average attendances in Ligue 1. As if all of that wasn't weird enough though, AS Monaco are also owned by Yekaterina Rybolovlev via a trust, though her father, the Russian oligarch and billionaire Dmitry Rybolovlev, is club president. Monaco might be weird, but they're also brilliant operators within the transfer market, obviously, otherwise I wouldn't have included them in this 7. Over the past decade, during a period in which rivals PSG have spent over €1.5 billion on new arrivals and have a net spend which exceeds €900 million, Monaco have recorded almost €200 million of profit on player trading. Unlike Braga, Monaco's business has been focused laser-like on young players, such as Aurélien Tchouameni, who was signed for €18 million from Bordeaux in January 2020, and sold to Real Madrid for €80 million in July 2022, or Thomas Lemar, who Monaco signed for €4 million from Cannes in 2015, before swiftly moving on to Atletico Madrid for €72 million in 2018. Other notable Monaco departees include the likes of Kylian Mbappe, James Rodriguez, Anthony Martial, Bernardo Silva, Fabinho, Yuri Tielemans, Axel Disasi, and Benoit Badiashile amongst others. Monaco's impressive wheeling and dealing shows few signs of letting up anytime soon. Last summer's €15 million signing Mohamed Kamara has likely doubled his valuation following his debut campaign. Meanwhile, Breel Mbolo had perhaps done likewise before suffering a crucial ligament rupture right at the end of the campaign. This summer's arrivals, Denis Zakaria, Mohamed Salisu, Philip Kern and Wilfred Singo, all signed for about the same amount that Monaco received from Chelsea for Disasi alone, are players of enormous potential, and Monaco's flying start to the season currently sees them leading the Ligue 1 table. 5th, Brentford. I know I'm calling them the 5th best club in all of world football when it comes to conducting transfer business, but even that feels harsh on Brentford, who have perhaps made fewer mistakes in the transfer market over the past decade than any other team in this 7. It is worth just reminding ourselves that when current owner Matthew Benham first took on nearly £3 million of Brentford's loans, agreeing to hold them interest-free for the next 5 years, the Bees had just been relegated to League 2, the 4th tier of English football. When Benham took full control of Brentford in 2012, the club was competing in League 1, the 3rd tier, with an average attendance of about 5,500. In the more than a decade since, Brentford's transfer business has been majestic. Time after time in the Championship, the Bees lost their best players, whether that be Saïd Benrahma, Ollie Watkins, Neil Maupay, Chris Mepham, Ezri Konsa, Andre Gray, Scott Hogan, Ryan Woods, or Moses Odabajo, but they just kept on improving. They also had to contend with having managers Mark Warburton and Dean Smith, poached by Rangers and Aston Villa, but at every junction they made the right decision, and with Thomas Frank, Benham struck gold. Between their arrival in the Championship in 2014 and winning promotion to the Premier League in 2021, Brentford made a profit of over £90 million on player trades, yet they still made 3 playoff appearances, reaching the promised land at the 3rd attempt. In addition to the signings that Brentford turned a massive profit on, the likes of Ivan Toney, Rico Henry, Ethan Pinnock, Brian Mbeumo, and in a slightly different vein, Christian Eriksen, have all been magnificent additions, helping Brentford finish 13th and 9th in their first 2 seasons back in their big time. Last season, Brentford had the lowest wage bill and the lowest squad expenditure in the Premier League, yet they finished 3 places and a massive 15 points above their West London rivals Chelsea, just 2 points off European qualification, and their squad is now valued at more than £300 million. 4th, Lille. Back in Ligue 1 in 4th, where one team spends more on transfers than the other 19 combined, there is no club in French football that is more tactful or shrewd in the transfer market than Lille. The most successful club in France during the immediate post-war era, Lille have grown more accustomed to being underdogs in recent decades, despite the fact that they are an enormous club. Ligue 1 title winners just twice since the 1950s, in 2011 and 2021, Lille are best known for their academy, recruitment, and player development. Homegrown players who Lille have been able to sell for an absolute fortune include the likes of Luca Dean, Divock Origi, and Eden Hazard. Much more notable, however, are the young players who Lille have bought, nourished, and turned a huge profit on. Nicolas Pepe is Lille's record sale, signed for €10 million in 2017 and sold for €79 million in 2019, though Victor Osimhen, who was signed for an initial €12 million in 2019 and sold for €70 to €80 million subject to add-ons in 2020, isn't too far behind. Add to them the likes of Sven Botman, Rafael Leao, Sofiane Boufal, Yves Bissouma, Mike Maignan, Renato Sanchez, Gabriel Magalhaes and Amadou Onana, and Lille's net spend over the past decade is a remarkable €321 million profit. That's the most in Ligue 1, the 6th most out of any club in world football during that time, and the 2nd most, by my estimates, if you exclude academy players. Lille's outstanding business has allowed them to remain competitive while spending far less than their rivals during that time, and for a more in-depth look at their recruitment, how the club is run more broadly, and their sensational Ligue 1 title in 2021 against all of the odds, feel free to check out the video that I made about just that. 3rd, Red Bull Salzburg. Say what you like about Red Bull-owned football clubs, such as that they are plastic, soulless franchises, hated in Germany and responsible for removing any semblance of competition within Austria, all for the sake of flogging a few energy drinks, or, something along those lines, but they sure as hell know what they're doing when it comes to recruitment and player sales. I'm not saying that excuses all of the other things, but facts are facts. RB Leipzig's recruitment is outstanding, but Red Bull Salzburg is among the finest in all of world football. Since being taken over and rebranded from SV Austria Salzburg to Red Bull Salzburg in 2005, the Red Bulls have won 14 Austrian Bundesliga titles, including each of the last 10 on the bounce. That has been made possible, aside from, being taken over by Austria's most valuable brand, by the recruitment and subsequent sales of the likes of Dominik Szoboszlai, Brendan Aronson, Patson Daka, Naby Keita, Sadio Mane, Kevin Campbell, Karim Adeyemi, Benjamin Sesko, and of course, Erling Haaland. Over the past decade, in addition to winning every single Austrian Bundesliga title, Salzburg have made €440 million of profit in the transfer market, which is the 3rd most in world football during that time. For a club in the Austrian Bundesliga, which is ranked as the 11th best league in Europe by UEFA's coefficients, and is only that high because of Salzburg themselves, that is simply outrageous. So, for all of the worthy criticisms that one can make of them, and the Red Bull franchise model as a whole, there is no way in which they couldn't feature. 2nd, Ajax. Ajax hit a bit of a bump in the road last season, slumping to a 3rd place finish in the Eredivisie, which is a crisis by their standards, but that is hardly surprising when you look at how their squad has been systematically picked apart in recent years. Just a couple of weeks ago, I made a video taking a look at the Ajax team that won their domestic double and very nearly reached the Champions League final in the 2018-19 season, and where those players are now. That was just 4 years ago, the season, not the video of course, yet not a single one of their players from that season is still playing for the club now. That's what made it quite interesting, but I've already plugged the Lille video, so I won't push my luck too much. Although Ajax undoubtedly have one of the best academies in world football, most of their most lucrative sales have been of players that they signed from elsewhere. Of Ajax's 12 most expensive departees, only 3 of them, Matthijs de Ligt, Jurrien Timber, and Donny van de Beek, were graduates of their own youth ranks. Antony, Ajax's biggest sale at €100 million, was signed for around €15 million from Sao Paulo. Frenkie de Jong, who was sold for a potential €86 million, cost Ajax literally €1. €57 million sale, Lisandro Martinez was signed for €7 million. I could go on. All in all, Ajax have profited to the tune of €475 million, almost $500 million, on player trades over the last 10 years, whilst remaining the most dominant club in the Netherlands, reaching a Europa League final and a UEFA Champions League semi-final. Following a difficult campaign last term, Ajax have overhauled their squad once again this summer, bringing in the likes of Josip Sutalo, Carlos Forbes, Chuba Akpom, and 5 other players, whilst turning a €50 million profit, as usual, and they'll be hoping that those fresh faces can propel them back to the summit of the Dutch game. 0. Honourable mentions. I won't go into too much detail with these, but just very briefly, the likes of Sporting, Benfica, RB Leipzig, Lyon, Porto, Udinese, Celtic, Borussia Dortmund, Dinamo Zagreb, and River Plate were very unfortunate not to make my 7. I also think Manchester City, if you look at how ruthless they are with their sales and the fees that they get for their players, plus some of the deals that they have done for the likes of Akanji, Alvarez, and even Haaland in recent years, are really wily operators in the transfer market, but I couldn't possibly bring myself to include a team that still has bottomless state-owned pockets, the second highest net spend in all of world football at over €1 billion over the past decade, and 115 charges from the Premier League lingering over them, in a list of clubs that do the best transfer business. In truth, Lyon and Porto were probably the 2 teams that came closest to featuring and were the toughest to leave out, but those are the types of decisions that you have to take in this job. It ain't easy. I'm not saying that I'm a hero, or that it's harder than working on an oil rig or down a coal mine. Of course not. That would be for others to say. All I'll say is, you're welcome. And on that note, it is time for Top Spot. First, Brighton and Hove Albion. Yes, you probably already predicted it, and if you didn't, then you're either a Crystal Palace fan, or you have been living under a rock for the last few years. Brighton's recruitment isn't just sublime, it's actually quite amusing. The fact that they keep signing players that no one has ever heard of from relatively unexplored markets for peanuts, selling them for record-breaking fees, those players then do rubbish somewhere else, and Brighton replace them with someone better, who costs peanuts once again, has now become a meme. For example, no one knows who will replace Moises Caicedo at Brighton yet. It might be a 21-year-old from Venezuela or a 19-year-old Gambian. All we know for certain is that they will be much better than Moises Caicedo. They'll probably win a couple of Ballon d'Ors, and then they'll be sold for £800 million to a team in Saudi Arabia, where they'll forget how to play football. In all seriousness, Brighton's transfer business over the years has had plenty of similarities with Brentford's, and that is little surprise given the fact that Matthew Benham and Tony Bloom are former business partners turned mortal enemies, who both use a similarly data-driven approach. For more information, and I don't feel bad about this one because it is genuinely really interesting and illuminating, feel free to watch the entire video that I made about Brighton's scouting, recruitment, and data harvesting, which I will leave a link to in the end screen. In terms of the facts and figures, Brighton have generated €325 million in revenue through player sales over the last 3 transfer windows alone. No, not even the last 3 years, the last 3 transfer windows, a figure which is bettered only very narrowly by Ajax in all of world football, and their net spend of €195 million profit is by far the highest in world football during that time. Brighton have sold Moises Caicedo, Marc Cucurella, Benjamin White, Yves Bissouma, Leandro Trossard, and Alexis McAllister all in the last 12 months. And yet, somehow they have just got better and better. I should mention the sales of Robert Sanchez and Neil Maupay, which were also highly lucrative for Brighton, though it is perhaps less surprising that they have improved in spite of them. Brighton, don't forget, also lost their manager Graham Potter last season, which many expected to come as a major blow, but the opposite is what turned out. Roberto De Zerbi's appointment looks like a masterstroke, and, inevitably for Brighton fans at this stage, he is already being touted for a series of jobs at super clubs. Brighton might not be a super club just yet, but their recruitment is without peer. And following a 6th place finish last season, this season will see the Seagulls competing in European football for the first time in the history of the club. If they can keep selling players for the types of fees that they receive from Chelsea for Marc Cucurella, and replacing them with players of the calibre of Pervis Estupiñán, Brighton are going to be a big problem for the rich 6 or 7 long term. And, as I said, if you want to find out whether that is a realistic prospect, and they can keep signing the likes of Moises Caicedo and Kaoru Mitoma, and Evan Ferguson of course, check out my Brighton recruitment video that I am about to link. It is a real eye-opener. Anyway, that is it for today's video, but thank you all very much as ever for watching. Hit the like button if you enjoyed it, let me know your thoughts down below in the comments, and of course, it goes without saying, make sure that you are subscribed and have notifications turned on, both for this channel, HITC Sevens, and also my second channel, Alfie Potsama, both of which should be on your screens now, along with that Brighton and Lille video that I mentioned earlier on. You can also find me on Twitter or on Instagram via the username @HITC Sevens on both, should you wish to do so.